I'm stretching the term e-learning here because early on this was not really e-learning. So we're going to flat out talk about the first procedure here, which was what I call show and quiz. This is a traditional model of computer-based instruction. It actually started in the 70s in the military, believe it or not. And essentially what it is bad instructional design. And I may spend a little bit of time, if I have a few minutes left here, beating up on instructional design later. But for now, let's just look at what the show and quiz procedure was about. Basically, show a picture, show some text, present some audio, then the student takes a quiz. Right? This is what a lot of people think online learning is about, and let me tell you right now, that's not online, that's not e-learning. Right? Because the student may learn something, right? But the teacher is not teaching. If you're not actually going out and using these technologies to their fullest extent, or using the literature in how you apply these technologies, then you're not really teaching. You're not selecting for that appropriate behavior. So when I teach people about how to do online courses and things, this is one of the first things I say, that online is not a digital textbook. That's not the way you want to think of it. It's a much more rich environment, and you can do much more with it. So we'll talk about that. But again, even in the 70s, there wasn't obviously the online environment, but you had some content, it presented to you, maybe some slides, and then it was, obviously not PowerPoint, but the slides, the content was shown on the screen, then you were quizzed on it. That's great. That was kind of the initial start, and believe it or not, today a lot of faculty members and teachers across the world think that's all you need to do to convert your course into an online course. So then after that, we started developing the simulation, and you can even argue that the simulation happened before this, but again, we're thinking about the electronic stuff. So war games and more, right? Obviously the military is huge in the use of simulation, so is the airline industry. They know the value of simulation. And also the medical field is great with simulation. And Bradley talks about how they've used their field has used simulation as a way to improve medical education. And you start with Sim1, right? So Sim1 was this sort of device that was human-like, and you could use it to explore different parts of the body and those types of things, and practice some basic procedures on it. There's all sorts of things that were associated with Sim1, but believe it or not, it died out. It was there in the 60s, and then it lost its focus. And later on, probably 20 years after that, the simulation technology really started to take off in the medical field. And today what you have is basically two different categories. One, which is the virtual reality approach, and I hate that term, but the idea that we're familiar with it, so I'll use it. And the idea with virtual reality here is that we're talking about computer screens, right? So it's a screen, you're interacting, you're going through brain slices, you're learning about the sulci and the gyri and all those things, and you can point to certain areas. Maybe you can even take quizzes, some interactive quizzes and those types of things. Maybe you can even drag and drop, or with some of the touch screens today, you can just do some pretty cool stuff. But it's still virtual reality, and it's not a very tactile sort of thing. But haptic systems are a completely tactile sort of simulator. This is where you've got a body part, not a real one, of course, but a simulated one. So a body part, and you're needing to do some type of surgery on it, or needing to do some type of procedure on it. And they're even coming out with these new cool haptic systems where they incorporate actual soft tissue, not human, but very similar, and you actually learn how to manipulate that tissue. And this is a pretty powerful tool. So I think that from my argument and my perspective and what I understand of the literature, in terms of simulation, let's ignore the military and the airline industry, and I think that the medical field is pretty much at the forefront of this. And that focus has gone on for the last 20 years in terms of improving teaching of medical practices and techniques. All right. Behavior management simulation, there's some fun ones out there. You can use, the simulation tools will allow you to learn how to do behavior modification, which is kind of interesting. The two that I've worked with are ComputerBased, number one, Behavior Breakthroughs, which teaches you about how to manage a child's behavior in some certain settings and certain problem environments. And then also Sniffy the Virtual Rat, which teaches you how to manage the behavior of a rat, just like if you had a rat lab or something. But again, these things are limited. They're only going to do what they're programmed to do, and it's not an infinite number of situations. But hopefully your skills will generalize beyond that. Okay? So why simulation? Well, it's closer to the real world, right? you're going to select for appropriate behavior. And we could go back and talk about the Skinner stuff here, but we've already done that with other people talking in this series. So we're going to select for appropriate behavior. In other words, we're going to manage the contingencies. And it sets up that contingency management. It makes the behavior automatic, if you will. So now when you're in the real world, you run into that particular scenario, you know what to do because you've simulated it 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times. So ultimately what we're getting at is the concept of generalization. A quality simulator will allow you to generalize from the simulator to the real world, and your behavior will just transition across that really smooth. So stimulus generalization is what we're getting at here, and that any new situation will pull out, if you will, that appropriate behavior. And we often think of simulators just as these very rigid sort of things, and but as the military and the airline industry prove, you can do all sorts of things with simulation that can then help some very complex behavior later on and teach you how to respond in the appropriate environment. Okay, a little bit of alphabet soup for you here. CB, PSI, and CAPSI, so computer-based personalized system of instruction and computer-aided personalized system of instruction, two different things, and we'll talk about those. These are developments that came out in the 90s, so they took the PSI approach, right, which Dean covered in his talk just a few minutes ago, and Crosby and Kelly in 1993 developed this computer-based PSI stuff. It was, think about what you're doing in 1993 with computers, right? So this is diskette-based software. There were certain keys that you had to have in order to make sure you couldn't copy the tests or give them away and things like that. It was primarily text-based. There was some graphical interfaces to indicate that it was that your time was going and then it was stopped and your time was up, that type of thing. But it was very, very simple. But you had multiple assessment types. They had short quizzes built into this. They had larger quizzes built, or larger tests built into it as well. But it was rather intensive. The computer didn't give you all the feedback. It gave you the correct answer after you were done, so it corrected you. Then you went back and you took it again. But there was still a lot of manual stuff that was happening here. It wasn't completely automated, but at least parts of it were. You didn't have to have a bunch of proctors like with the original Keller plan. And then Joseph Pear and Crontodd developed another one, which is basically CAPSI, computer-aided PSI. I tend to think of this as just computer-based PSI updated because it's just updated to the current technology for the late 90s. So it was computer-aided, again, proprietary type software. You can see there this is a screenshot from the journal article where they presented this, and they've done quite a bit of research on it in terms of their technique that they're using. And you can see what they're doing. Here's the question, you give an example, or you give the answer, and then somebody logs in and gives you the comments. So again, there's this sort of manual sort of thing that you have to do with it. One of the problems with it is it's proprietary software, so you're going to have to pay to use CAPSI courses right now. It's largely text-based, at least the older versions are. We're going to talk about their newer version here in a few minutes, which is not just text-based, but it is also proprietary. And then in this case, the big development was it worked over a LAN. You didn't have to sit there and carry around a disk with you. It worked over local area network, so you could log into your terminal and access the CAPSI software, and it would do this thing. And it was all self-paced, and you could work on your own. You didn't have to worry about checking out diskettes or anything like that. So it was a pretty big development, and it was really cool. And it kind of brought CAPSI or PSI back to the forefront, at least in some circles, of realizing that we could do this now. The technology is here. We can do this in a much more efficient way than what we used to. So current technology, this is stuff that's going on right now. Okay, so we're talking about dynamic instructional software. Dynamic meaning a dynamic web-based system. So in dynamic software on the web is basically software that's aware of who's using it, right? So you go to a dynamic website, let's say Amazon or something, they're going to remember you, right? So you log in and it remembers your last purchases, and what you see is different than what the next person sitting next to you sees, and that's the difference between a dynamic and a static website. So of course we apply dynamic websites to learning, and even CAPSI has done dynamic websites now. You can see their actual website there if you want to go take a look at it and play around with some of their stuff. And they've used it to teach all sorts of things, APA style, research methods. There's currently 2 different behavior analysis classes being offered through the University of Manitoba. Orientations and systems, learning and foundations. Think about these courses. Some of these are not small. Orientations and systems, it's a history of science, okay? And they're using PSI to do it. This is not about just teaching the basics of math and reading and writing. That's not what, that's only one part of what PSI can do, or programmed instruction, or precision teaching. That's only one small aspect. You can do so much more with it. And in fact, they've even done higher order thinking. Imagine that, using a PSI, a programmed approach, to teach higher order thinking. Why? Why can they do it? Because it's a skill. It's not some abstract thing that exists independent of a behavior that you do. And sure, it's complex, but as long as you program it properly, you can select for the behavior of higher order thinking. And they've demonstrated it. Right? So you can look at their website and see some of their evidences of that as well. One of my complaints is that it's proprietary. It's like, why not open this up? But I can understand why they do it. I'm just an open source guy. But the good news is it's web-based. So we're now into the 21st century. We're not just using LAN. This is over the networks, and in a sense, it's in the cloud. Not quite, but it's close enough. Right? And some of the really cool developments have been in learning management systems, and they're starting to actually incorporate some of these basic principles that we know about learning into the LMS themselves. My joke here is, isn't your father's blackboard? That's because some of the older blackboards had no ability to do these things. The newer ones are getting much better, but the ones that I'm very familiar with, Desire to Learn, and Canvas, which is their product from Instructure's product, which is a very powerful one, and then also Chisimba, one that I've worked with as well. Those three are some of the really more powerful ones that are out there. Moodle, of course, but I'm not going to list them all. There's dozens of them. But I know that Desire to Learn almost has PSI built into it. It's pretty cool. You can't move on to material X until you've mastered material Y or passed X number of tests or done X number of exams. Those types of things is what's out there. So that's the dynamic part that I'm talking about. So each student gets a completely different batch of material when they log in. Why? Because student A may be further along than student B. So there's lots of stuff going on there. All right. They're dynamic, as I've said. They can automate nearly everything. You program the proper answers, the proper feedback, depending on the answers that you get, and of course it can spit out those the responses to you. There's even some software that can help you analyze and grade essay type exams. I haven't played around with them much, but I know that the technology is definitely there. In fact, it's been out there for more than a decade. So, big problem though, development time. Takes forever to develop these types of courses on LMSs. Why? Because it's intensive. You have to build an entire course before you deliver the course. Some are open source, so you can get these for free. In fact, all the three that I've listed up there, those are open source. Desire to Learn, Canvas, and Chisimba, you can get all those without paying a penny for them. So. All right, online PSI for every classroom. Can we do it? Sure. What do you need? Proper LMS. Follow the PSI principles as we've outlined here. Develop your content, and then guess what? You end up with e-learning, which hopefully is teaching. In other words, you're teaching the person. It's an activity. You're changing their behavior. You're selecting for new responses. Right? That's kind of the goal that I have. And can you teach PSI? Can you use PSI to teach everything? I doubt it. But I think that we've demonstrated so far that you can you can do a lot of things with PSI, including teaching higher order thinking.